All right, here we go. Today is Sunday, October 28th, 2018, and this is episode 227 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. I guess this would almost be our Halloween episode, I would imagine, of Defensive Security Podcast.
That's correct.
In fact, I went to a Halloween party last night. Had a few adult beverages, and I'm getting a little too old for that, apparently, because I'm moving slow today.
You do look like you're moving a little more slowly than normal. And some of the fans in the stadium have already made comments to me about that.
I know. Look, I'll do some Coke, I'll do some meth, I'll do some Red Bull. I'll get my energy back up for the second act. I promise.
It'll all be good. All right, and I guess I should have previously said that the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employers or necessarily reality. So,
it's true.
Anyway, so it's been a couple weeks. I think the last time we were in your ears was the DerbyCon episode, which was, it was almost a month ago now. So,
oof.
I know. Life got busy. I had the travel month from hell. I am back home. Last week, I actually forgot all the stuff I had promised my family I would do in the evenings, and that's why there was no show last week. So there you go.
You know what? You need to make some decisions about your priorities, Jerry. And
I know.
This whole family and job thing keeps getting in the way. I think you might have to make some hard choices there.
Just not working for the show. I get it.
But I'm glad you're back, and we'll see if we can get a couple episodes in before we all, start traveling heavily again.
That is for sure.
Because the holidays, they are approaching.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, happy Halloween, and we'll get into some stories. And the first one comes from Healthcare IT News, and this is my my token feeding of my my availability bias, or my confirmation bias, I should say. And the title here is debunking the cybersecurity thought that humans are the weakest link.
You are the weakest link. Goodbye.
So, it struck me that the point of this article, and there's also a couple of one video. And that seemed to really strike a chord with the presentation you gave at DerbyCon, right?
Yeah, I will say it does match up nicely with some of the things I was rambling about during my presentation, which, if you're curious, by the way, the video is available. We'll probably put it in the show notes or something.
I actually did. So the last...
there you go.
Yeah.
Some people seem to like it. I don't know. They could just be being polite.
Yeah, so anyway, for those of you who don't know what the hell we're talking about, the point here of this, the person they interviewed here, is that humans are humans, right? And we shouldn't be thinking about them and their failures as a weak link. We should be thinking about that human capability as the way I'll describe it, as a design constraint of security controls, and so we shouldn't be artificially, putting artificial expectations about the capability of people, for instance, to be able to identify spear phishing emails and malware and not making just simple mistakes, right? That's unrealistic in the which I think is the point of the person they interviewed here, and as IT and IT security people, as she puts it, we need to design a security net. We need to put a security net behind these people so that, if and when they do something that is, quote, wrong, it's not a tragic event. It doesn't result in something horrific.
Yeah, so if they get tricked into clicking on a malicious link, or they open an attachment, or whatever it may be, some sort of phishing or business email compromise, and they talk about how much it's on the rise as well. It's not catastrophic for the company. I concur. It's one of those things where you have to assume, no matter how much you train, no matter how much the good intentions are there and how smart your people are, they're still going to get tripped up by even not very sophisticated attacks, because the bad guys know how to push our psychological buttons and get us to do things. So, and to think that we can train that away, or train that away and do enough awareness training that's never going to happen is naive. Yeah. And I concur, obviously, with the article, because I spoke about the same topic. But I like the concept of, do your best. Hopefully they won't all fall for it all the time, but assume they will. And how do you build technical controls or process controls with that in mind, so that it is not a catastrophic impact to the organization?
Right. So some of the comments in the article recommendations were implementing network segmentation and multi-factor authentication as examples of the safety net. By the way, the person who they interviewed here was named Teresa Payton. So just didn't have her name on the tip of my tongue. So there you go. It occurs to me this is kind of a sea change, or maybe something short of a sea change in perspective, because for a long time, it was the mantra was security is everybody's job, and I think to a certain extent, we do need our people to be able to recognize certain things, but at the same time, the level of sophistication of our adversaries is such that I think we've probably passed the point of diminishing returns on what we can do with education. So,
yeah, because everything takes resources away from a finite bucket.
Correct.
Whether people, time, money, energy, thought process, and where are you going to spend your time and energy? And that's one thing that I'm always curious about, how truly effective some of these training and awareness campaigns are, and simulations and that sort of thing. And keeping in mind that it's also a moving target. The bad guys can always adapt as well. So it's much like any sort of arms race. As soon as we get good at perhaps teaching our folks or coming up with a technical control to stop a certain type of psychological attack, it's easy for the bad guys to shift to another one. There's plenty of open attack surface out there to go after people. So anyway, where I was going with that is I'm curious. Most of the stats I've ever seen about training and awareness and simulation effectiveness has always come from those vendors themselves. I don't know of anybody doing true objective testing of what works and what doesn't work against certain types of attacks. Mm-hmm. So I'd be curious.
Yeah, I would say that there's probably data on certain types of things like phishing. We know that there's the phishing simulation providers track a whole lot of data, and every now and then they publish reports about how likely people are to fall for different types of phishes and what time of the day and what day of the week and lots of stuff like that. But there aren't I'm not aware of a similar thing for attacks on simulated attacks on a help desk or and so on, right? So
right.
It's a good question, but I guess the point is, and I know I don't want people to misconstrue what I'm saying, and I think what you're saying too is not that we should stop training,
right?
And I think training is still very important. It's just that it's only one component, and we need to make sure that we understand the limitations of that component in the context of the threat landscape.
Yeah, I don't want executives to get this false sense of security that because they're doing phishing training and simulation and having people go through online courses once a year, they're safe completely from this issue. Right. That's just not true.
Exactly. All right, so moving on to the next story, and this one comes from thinkadvisor.com, and the title is SEC, that's the Securities and Exchange Commission for those not in the U.S., hits Voya financial advisors with $1 million fine over cyber breach.
That seems not a whole lot of money for a company the size of Voya, but...
No, it may, but it has some teeth to it. It's not a small number either.
Yeah, sure. Anyway,
so Voya is a financial, as the name of the company may lead you to believe, they are a financial advisor organization, and so basically what happened was Voya outsourced the servicing, I guess, of the trade. I don't know if you call it the trading desk, right? But the organization that helps their clients allocate money in investments and whatnot. Voya outsourced that to a third party, and in doing so, they created a portal that this third party would access Voya's customer accounts via. And so some malicious adversary realized how that all worked and actually called up Voya and got Voya to reset the passwords that this third party used to access Voya's account portal. And
they were being helpful. That's customer service.
Totally customer service oriented, and so these adversaries then used it to access 5,600 different VFA customers' accounts, and then actually they went so far as for three of the victims, they actually went so far as to impersonate them and committed financial fraud. So anyway, the SEC fine was levied at their violation of a particular new rule called the theft red flags rule. The identity theft red flags rule, which is, again, you may be led to believe it's intended to help prevent identity theft of investors, right? So anyhow, the SEC claimed that Voya did not have appropriate policies and procedures in place, and that, more importantly, they didn't apply those policies and procedures to their third party.
Ooh.
Yes.
But, it's interesting because I was joking earlier about customer service, but there's actually a truism there. If you're too difficult to work with in a situation where, you're a legitimate customer and you legitimately need to reset a password, you lose business. Yeah. So there's a balance between being, when you're a provider, when you have customers, that you're a business providing them some sort of service. If you're too difficult to deal with, you're going to lose business. And this is something that I don't think a lot of companies, or a lot of people are aware of, that this business trade-off, this risk trade-off exists when we're dealing with customer service issues and password reset issues and that sort of thing. Because, companies could just issue out, tokens or force everybody to use two-factor, but they know that there's a certain amount of customers that they will lose if they're too difficult to work with.
Yeah,
or perceived to be.
Exactly. They want to keep it. They want to keep the relationship as frictionless as possible, so that
right.
You want to keep doing business with them. This is a difficult needle to thread, like you said, and I would say that this kind of attack, I think, is very, very common. Not necessarily in the financial services space, because it's pretty heavily regulated, and we tend to hear about it when it goes wrong. But I can say that I know of many, many, many examples of this happening in different industries, from telecom to ISPs to healthcare and many, 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 many other types of industries. But I don't think we really hear about it much, because it's the problems that arise tend not to result in a fine, I guess.
Right.
There isn't anybody like the SEC lording over them and whacking them on the head. Now, just to be clear, Voya actually did not admit any wrongdoing, and they agreed to settle the issue and pay the $1 million fine. So I just want to make sure that's in fairness.
I'm sure they probably also are now establishing those process and procedures called out by the SEC that they were lacking.
Yes. And by the way, that's I've worked in regulated industries before, and for a while now, actually. And one of the problems you run into, or one of the things you really try to avoid, is having the government come in and mandate, some onerous new process. And so again, kind of back to the point of threading the needle. You're incentivized to create your own policies and processes that get to the end goal. But if you don't, and some organization like the SEC comes in, they could really wreck your day by mandating processes that are far in excess and far more costly than something that you may have otherwise implemented. And so you have to be cautious of that. Now I don't know that the SEC has in this case required a third party. I don't know what the right word is, but overseer. But like the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the U.S., oftentimes when they settle cybersecurity related issues with companies that they claim did wrong, one of the penalties they slap is that a third party overseer must be engaged for like a period of 20 years. To watch over their security programs, and that's no fun, by the way.
Yeah, not to get into the concept of is the government regulator all that wise to begin with, right?
No, and that's exactly my point. Is that they could be making you do stuff that is just pointless.
And potentially making you uncompetitive, right? Because your competitor doesn't necessarily have to do that, or they're smaller. It's a really interesting slippery slope when you start dealing with all these sort of cyber oversight and regulatory issues from the government, because it really, it sounds on paper like a great idea, right? Somebody's coming in to make sure these companies that are big and important are handling their security properly, and we've got good professional oversight, but there are these sort of unintended consequences in terms of innovation, in terms of being able to adapt to the latest and greatest threats quickly and rapidly. If your regulator is sort of gun shy about new technologies because they're not up to speed, you may be not. You're very much the dog being wagged by the tail because of what your regulator is comfortable with, and that's not necessarily the point of competition and creative capitalism and that sort of thing, but that's a whole different topic, I guess, for another day. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure that a lot of folks at Voya thought they were doing the right balance of risk versus business as well. And they're not naive. They're making decisions based on what they think is best for their customers and their employees and their company.
Yeah, I mean it made sense. It probably made sense to somebody at some point, and but a lot of times, as I've seen, these sorts of failures happen as a result of lack of imagination on how things can go wrong, right? Not necessarily out of negligence or malice or anything. It's just ignorance of how things can fail, and I think that's a really pervasive problem we have in IT right now. So there's another article about a organization that was sanctioned here, and the title here is insurer Anthem will pay a record $16 million for massive data breach, and this comes from SecurityWeek.com. And so we at the time, this was back in 2015, I think. God, I can't believe that was 3 years ago. Yeah. So at the time, Anthem actually was called WellPoint back then, and the story, as has now been understood, is that they were spearphished by a super advanced adversary who sent emails around using the domain name instead of wellpoint.com. It was we11point.com, and got people to log in and hand over their company credentials, and and here we are. So this is the largest HIPAA settlement, or the largest settlement for violating HIPAA's data protection requirements in history. So,
which is interesting because 60 million to you and I is a lot of money, but to a big insurance provider, it's not a huge amount of money to them.
No.
And so, to this to be the largest fine is interesting. Maybe I don't know. I don't know enough about the regulatory mindset behind HIPAA enforcement, but it seems light for that to have been the biggest ever.
Well,
but,
so relative to the size of the breach, I think that's true. I mean, it was I think like almost 80 million. Yeah, 79 million people had personal information stolen. Including this, as they say, names, birth dates, social security numbers, and medical IDs. I mean, basically everything you'd need to do some pretty good financial fraud against victims. Although, as I understand it, there hasn't been any evidence that any of that data was used in financial fraud. I think it was still assumed, at least the last I heard, at least, which has been a while, still assumed that this may have been a more politically motivated attack than commercially motivated. But that's all hypothesis. I think part of the low settlement is probably that the law just doesn't really support a much larger settlement, and then the other is, I don't think I'm not sure a larger settlement is or fine is really warranted given the way that they were attacked. It wasn't like Anthem had their guard down. I mean, it was kind of like we talked about earlier, right? It was that they were fished, and that now they can be faulted for not having the ability to detect that unauthorized people were logging in with authorized credentials, and that is made reference to here. But that's
I'm not saying it's a good idea, but they could have forced two-factor login. They could have done more advanced authentication mechanisms or things to fight this problem. But this goes back to what we were saying earlier. It makes them more difficult to do business with. And things that you and I may find trivially easy to handle may not be for those who are not IT savvy or who have not spent their life working on computers and don't want to deal with some weird code popping up on their phone or whatever. It's we've got to keep in mind that their customer base is highly diverse in terms of skill set, intelligence, technical acumen.
Yep. So, so the Health and Human Services, which is the group that enforces the HIPAA law here in the U.S., they're quoted as, or the article says, HHS said its investigation found that Anthem had failed to deploy adequate measures for countering hackers. The company lacked an enterprise-wide risk analysis, which, by the way, I believe is an actual requirement in the HIPAA regulation. And so if they didn't do that, that's probably one of the reasons they got slapped. Had insufficient procedures to monitor activities on systems. Again, that's this is one of those things where I'm led to believe that they had procedures and capability to monitor, but they didn't work in a way that detected this. And so therefore they were insufficient by definition. And that's one of those things, that's a trap, right?
It is. Yeah. It could. What if it would have caught 1,000 other ways this would have happened? Would this one edge case got by or whatever?
It's a logic trap right there. They failed to identify and respond to suspected or known security incidents and did not implement adequate minimum access controls to shut down intrusions from as early as February 2014. Now, that last sentence, the last part of that last sentence, kind of has me wondering if there are other things that we're not aware of, right? Because this breach happened in 2015, and the word shutdown intrusions it makes me believe, that maybe there are other things at play here that.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we're just seeing a news report. We don't have any inside knowledge.
Yep. So, again, the point is of the last two stories, I think governments around the world are becoming more activist in even in politically friendly climates to business. I would say that governments around the world are really starting to clamp down and take mishandling of personal data by companies pretty seriously, and I think that trend is going to continue. So, we're something that we as security people have to be really aware of, and at times, by the way, there's a story that we didn't include in this about in particular the GDPR having some unforeseen consequences in terms of security, right, and whatnot. Yeah. So sometimes you've got a pretty, especially if you're a global company, you have a very difficult landscape of regulations that you have to navigate, and it's difficult to please all of your regulators all of the time. So,
yeah, that is an interesting challenge, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, like we were talking about earlier. But I still feel like a lot of companies don't have the best guidance. Like, we're still feeling our way through this with case law and expectations being truly written down and truly explained, and it does feel sometimes like you're kind of rolling the dice with some of these regulators.
I think we are in in an interesting period from a data privacy and data security regulatory perspective. I mean, I think that governments intuitively know they have to do something, but they don't know what to do. And in as you mentioned, previously, they're they're acting how they know, in the way they know, and sometimes that's informed by parties with different agendas, and parties that have ignorance about how things work, and lots of different situations that give rise to these regulations and whatnot, and here we are. But at the same time, if you're a global company, you can't or even a local company, you can't thumb your nose at regulations. You have to you've got to comply with the law. So,
indeed.
Anyway, moving on to our next story. This one comes from Sucuri, the Sucuri blog, and the title is "Malicious Redirects from NewShareCounts.com Tweet Counter." So, interesting story. We've seen a lot of this happening, this kind of thing happening recently, and this is another variant of the supply chain attacks that have been, which by the way, supply chain attacks I think have a ever broadening scope of what kind of fits in there. So I suspect we're going to have to start breaking that down into subcomponents. But for a long time, Twitter used to have follow buttons and tweet buttons that you could embed on your website that would show how many people had retweeted or how many Twitter followers you have. But back in 2015, they got rid of that, and everybody wants to to show how many Twitter followers they have. So a cottage industry of third-party Twitter tweet counters popped up, including this one called NewShareCounts.com, and so that one apparently gained moderate popularity, and then went bust a couple of years later, and so the way this apparently worked was you would embed a piece of code, JavaScript code, hosted on an Amazon S3 bucket, and that JavaScript code would would do the show the counts for you. But apparently after the real newsharecounts.com organization went belly up, someone somehow took over the code hosted on that Amazon S3 bucket and changed it so that it would actually redirect visitors who were using mobile devices, if they were to visit a website with this piece of code included and they hit the back button, it would redirect them to a malicious website, and which would then try to do various malicious things. So but the point is that, and we've seen this a lot lately, especially in the plugin space with like WordPress plugins and different different plugins from different pieces of open source software. Either the original author exits the support of that plugin, or they sell it to someone who ends up being a malicious actor. But the point is, we're often including code in our websites and maybe even internal applications that that at one point in time are legitimate and valid, but over the course of time, that ownership may change. And so, this is it's an interesting challenge because when you put it into practice, or when you put it into service, it's legitimate, and it may stay legitimate for some long period of time. But then at some point in the future, that something happens, it changes hands, and now you've got something malicious on your otherwise legitimate website. And
the tough part is, in this one, it's really difficult for the website owner to even know.
Correct.
That they would need to get a report probably from an endpoint user of something weird going on with it. It's a very innocuous looking code in general. So it's an interesting supply chain issue. And some of the bigger companies I see do like an annual audit of this stuff, but hell, that's way too long a period of time for this sort of thing to be happening, potentially. So it's an interesting problem. I guess there's something to be said about be careful with, frankly, if you're a big business, small projects, open source projects, or, I hate to say that because that's some of the most innovative stuff, but in general, with a large company that if you're utilizing as a vendor for something like this, you've got less of a chance of it being abandoned. But I don't know. There's no good answer on this one. What do you need to do? Hire people to every day check all the third-party code on your website and make sure that it's still maintained and not gone rogue. It's an interesting problem.
Well, not necessarily, but let me step back for a second. I think you're spot on. That is a difficult problem that has no easy solution. But when you read through this article, there were certainly indicators that something was going on, and part of me wonders. And again, this is like IT is becoming like having kids. It's a commitment. When you stand up a website, it's like you're committing to whether you know it or not. You're committing to a certain set of things. And, in this particular case, there were a lot of discussions happening on various forums like WordPress about how, how this particular counter went belly up. And so conceivably, if you had a program in place to try to proactively monitor or check periodically on the third-party stuff that you've got included in your website, maybe that's an answer. But like you said, I mean, how often do you have to do that? Every day is ridiculously onerous, and once a year is way too long. But what's correct, right? And
I will say, I don't think I ever had this problem with MySpace.
Well, that's true until that Sam, was it the the Sammy, the worm that Sam Kamkar.
Oh, right.
I forget the name of the worm, but yeah.
So that my joke is not even appropriate. Carry on then.
Wah wah wah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So anyway, if you have any bright ideas on what to do there, we'll make you famous or something, relatively famous. Anyway. So, sounded cooler in my head. So
our moms will know you exist.
That's right. So moving on to next story, which comes from CSO Online. The title is Ransomware Attack Hits North Carolina Water Utility Following Hurricane.
Get Jack Bauer on the phone.
Yeah. Yes. So story here is the Onwassa water supply company in North Carolina, which is a regional water provider, was hit with a ransomware attack shortly after Hurricane Florence blew through and wrecked wrecked a lot of the infrastructure in the region. And so they were already this water supply company was already kind of reeling from that, and then they were hit by this ransomware and look, it's difficult to understand exactly what really happened, but the story here goes that back on October 4th, they were hit with this banking malware called Emotet, which is really it's more than a dropper, right? But it's an early stage attack Trojan that's typically used to deliver more advanced types of malware. And
sure. So once it gets a foothold, it calls home to get potentially something better, worse, or evil.
Correct. And I suspect, I don't know, I'm not an Emotet expert, but
I'll say.
Thanks, buddy. I have a feeling that this may have been one of those cases where where the access to this company, this organization, was sold, in some underground market through this infection.
Right. So somebody, some bad guy says, "Hey, I've got a foothold in these types of companies. Who wants it for a certain fee?"
Exactly.
On the dark web.
On the dark web. That's right.
Which that's just when you load up the dark theme in Firefox, right? Then you're on the dark web.
That's what I always thought.
I thought so.
Yeah. You turn your screen brightness down. Yep. So absolutely. But apparently they knew. So this water company Onwassa knew that they had this Emotet problem, and they were having some trouble apparently eradicating it. They said it was it proved to be persistent, in quotes. Which by the way, they don't go into details about what that means, but I have this mental vision of people with malware bytes scanning and declaring systems that were infected to be clean and put back into service. Again, I don't have any inside knowledge, but I've seen this movie before and I know how that goes. And I'll just say this is a public service announcement. If you have a system infected with a Trojan, don't clean it, take it offline and rebuild. Thank you very much. Otherwise, you could be like Onwassa,
But Jerry, the scan came back clean, and we've got work to do.
I know. That's true. It's true.
And by the way, how is Malwarebytes going to work in the cloud? Have we figured that out yet?
I don't know, but that's a great question. Hopefully, I got to believe they're on it.
I mean, how could they not?
Right. So anyway, yeah. So 9 days later, on October 13th, they woke up to a very bad. Oh, actually, I guess they were there while it was happening. They ended up with ransomware called Ryuk, I guess is how you would say it. And it's not entirely different than the SamSam ransomware that affected like the city of Atlanta. Where it kind of goes here, there, and everywhere and encrypts everything. And and by the way, this next paragraph, there's a paragraph in here that paints this great mental picture. So it says, although An Onwasa IT staff member was on hand to see the attack. IT unsuccessfully stopped IT was unsuccessful in stopping the ransomware infection from spreading. The water utility said IT staff took immediate action to protect system resources by disconnecting Onwasa from the internet, but the cryptovirus spread quickly along the network, encrypting databases and files. And I have this mental picture of someone running into the server room and like yanking cables out of routers. And
well, assuming that this quote is an accurate description of the response they took, wow, did they not understand what they were up against?
No, they did not. So they had a locally propagating piece of malware that was encrypting systems locally, and they disconnected themselves from the internet.
Right. So so this malware had no need to talk to the internet, and they unplugged the internet because I don't know why.
Yeah. So by the way, the Ryuk malware or ransomware is actually pretty interesting. It is, in fact, fairly targeted. The encryption keys, unlike many other types of ransomware, the encryption keys are hard coded into the ransomware on a per victim basis. So it's it was that's why they actually do say that this was a targeted attack, and I would, based on my understanding of Ryuk, I would tend to agree.
But okay, I don't mean to pick on the victim here, but I do find it interesting that they had a week and a half knowing that they had active malware in their environment.
Yeah. So let me, I'm going to go on a little soapbox.
All right.
And say that a lot of organizations, when they see, if you're a utility company and you see banking malware on your, in your network, you're thinking, what's the thing that everybody's thinking? Well, it's a good thing we're not a bank, and it's a good thing we don't let people do banking from their PCs.
True. Well, and also, did they even know what it was at the time?
Yeah. We don't know. I mean, it's easy to sit here and armchair quarterback what was going on, but
No, but I think part of the mission of this podcast is to dissect it for lessons learned, and one of the lessons learned is be aggressive in at least neutering the ability for this thing to communicate.
Correct.
So if you know what you've got, so I'm assuming, and this may be a bad assumption, that this Emotet did not come with the ransomware already embedded, that it must have done a command and control pull of that.
Yes.
And that is something that they probably should have been able to understand what that communication channel looked like and block it if they did have good awareness of what they were fighting. We don't know if they did or didn't, but and then knowing that you've got this self-propagating basically worm at that point, you should be disconnecting impacted machines from each other, not necessarily the entire network from the internet. But so there's a lot of issues here, and jumping ahead a little bit in the story, because I know you were going to get on your sandbox too. They get a little sacrimonious about this, and they also feel that this was absolutely intentional, and that there was. Let's see, who's speaking here? The CEO of this
Onwasa,
feels confident the time of the attack is related to the aftermath of Hurricanes Florence and Michael. Let's see. Hudson told WITN, which I think is a local news channel, the level of coincidence is too great for hackers somewhere on Earth to pick a community of heroes, the home of the Marine Corps, with 3 major military installations, picking and targeting a critical component of the infrastructure, the water system immediately following 2 storms.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I mean, even though it's targeted, I suspect that it was still
a target of opportunity.
A target of opportunity. They got this somehow. They got this Emotet infection, and then I've got to believe that the ultimate ransomware attacker was probably unrelated to the group that dropped Emotet in the first place, but used it. I mean, they just saw it as a target of opportunity.
And all that being said, they also said we'll never pay.
Which by the way, I mean, good on them, right? They make the point that just paying the ransom is funding criminal activity, and so good on them for that. They point out that they're going to have to that their operations are going to be slower while they're doing things manually and recovering their IT. But I support that decision. If they have the ability to, if the water isn't going to stop, like it would be a different story, by the way, if they were going to, if the whole area was going to be without water for the next month and a half, I think that'd be a different, probably a different calculus. But that's not what's going on here. It's, they may have to process invoices manually or something like that for a period of time.
So I wonder if their computers were like under a Boyle computer advisory.
They had to boil their USB drives.
It's the best joke I can come up with when I'm hungover. I'm sorry. That's all I got.
No worries. So anyway, I do think that people tend, like you pointed out, I think people tend to automatically assume that they were targeted, and I do think that at some point this did become a targeted attack, but I think it started off as an opportunistic attack.
Well, there's also a PR aspect, right? If they can come out and say this was a foreign government-based targeted attack,
sure,
and it gives them a little air cover.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the foreign governments are attacking us, wanting our Bitcoins. The Russian government needs Bitcoins. So anyway, I think you said it very well. When you see something like this, we have to take it very seriously. I think there's kind of a couple of main lessons, at least for me here, is we need our people to be able to have some level of understanding of what they're dealing with when something like Emotet hits, and being able to understand that that's a different kind of animal than, let's say, a malicious cookie that your antivirus flagged on, or we need some ability to be able to triage and whatnot, and then also when you coincidentally happen to be on site and you start seeing your systems being locked up, to be able to understand, what is the right course of action to take. Because again, if the description here is correct, that they really didn't help themselves any by unplugging the internet. It would have been better for them to unplug things. But to be candid, it's entirely possible that by the time they actually saw stuff being encrypted, that it had already propagated everywhere, and they wouldn't have, unplugging anything wouldn't have really helped at that point. Although maybe running into the server room and hitting the emergency power off button may have helped. But it's awesome to be able to armchair quarterback this stuff.
And it's the point is for us to try to learn something from it to help other people, but not to just nitpick them.
Correct.
Because we weren't there, we don't know exactly what happened. Have you looked up how RIAC spreads? So typically it spreads the same in a similar way to SamSam through RDP. Yeah.
And so, by the way, I it should be said that it is entirely possible that the Emotet infection is coincidental and unrelated.
That is a good point.
So,
computers are hard.
Computers are hard. Security is hard. It's so hard. All right, and then last story for today comes from ZDNet. Title is Equifax engineer who designed breach portal gets 8 months of house arrest for insider trading. So another SEC action, although SEC can't levy criminal penalties against a person. The story is pretty interesting here. So Equifax, in the lead up to their public disclosure of the breach, they they mobilized a lot of efforts internally to prepare for the eventual public announcement, including the creation of the unfortunate website that they created for their affected customers, or I guess they weren't really customers, the affected data breach victims, to log into and get information and whatnot. So this was the EquifaxSecurity2017.com website, which everybody thought at the time was a phishing website.
Right. Yeah, there was a lot of angst around that particular website as well.
Right. So the someone inside Equifax was actually chartered with helping to build this website. And at the time, he was told that the code he was writing was to help one of their commercial customers, with their breach, not anything to do with Equifax, but through his own research and kibitzing with other fellow Equifax employees, he came to realize that the code he was writing was actually in support of Equifax's own breach that had not yet been disclosed.
The breach, it's coming from inside the house.
That's right. And so apparently he took this as an opportunity to make some cash, and he did what any reasonable person would do. He logged into his wife's investment account, and he bought a couple $100 worth of put options on Equifax stock for a considerably lower value, and that paid off to the tune of about $75,000 after the breach was announced publicly. He profited about $75,000. So ultimately, Equifax. By the way, he's not the first person, right? So this is the second person to have charges brought against him. The first person is still in the case against that first person is still working its way through the court system. But this person was convicted and has to pay a $50,000 fine, and he has to pay back all of the profit he made, and he is under house arrest for 8 months.
Hey,
and he was fired from his job.
Profit plus interest.
Oh, profit plus interest. That's correct. Yes.
Don't know what the interest rate is. So what we're learning is inside trading bad.
Correct. And I've said this a few times before. A lot of times in security and in IT generally, we have access to non-public information. And just because we're not an officer of the company does not alleviate us from insider trading rules. Okay? And so it is really important for everyone to understand that. Now, I have a feeling this sort of thing happens a lot more frequently than we're led to believe, but in this particular case, because of that first person that was found to be insider trading, Equifax launched an internal investigation and actually that's how they found this person's activity, insider trading activities. So, and by the way, you shouldn't avoid this because for fear of getting caught. You should not do this because you're an ethical person and you take your job as a security professional seriously and whatnot. And I know I'm being preachy, right? But if you can't do that, you're in the wrong line of business. So
I did find it interesting that Equifax found the insider trading.
Yes.
So normally you would assume like the SEC would do that because they have records of all the trades and can associate it with staff members of the company and suspicious trades around that time. So how did Equifax have that trade information?
Equifax can get records of trading on their own stock.
All right, that's fair.
So I assume they looked at all of the trade activity and option trade activity, in a period leading up to the announcement, and compared that against their list of employees. And
it does make me wonder if organized crime, when they've got a breach that they know is going to get popped, if they don't somehow quietly, obfuscatively do this kind of stuff too.
Say more. What do you mean?
So let's say I'm a bad guy and I'm an organized crime bad guy or foreign government, whatever. And I know I've got a foothold in a big company and I know it's likely to get publicized at some point. Or like I know I'm about to get caught. If I can do it in such a way with good OPSEC so it doesn't lead back to me, maybe I short the stock or I buy puts or that sort of thing to profit as well. Now, that's, of course, is a record of suspicious trade activity that could easily be identified. So you have to do it in a very clever way that I don't know how to do. But it seems like a way for a bad guy to increase their profitability of a breach.
Correct. And by the way, so let's carry that further and say, if you're a bad guy who is who's been chartered with taking with launching an attack against the company, like you could hedge your bets on success by buying both short and long positions. Options.
That's true.
in the stock, right? So that way, kind of if you fail to affect your breach, you could still potentially make some money.
Or you could just get into stock trading and just stay away from hacking entirely.
Seems so pedestrian.
Anyway, I'll have to noodle on that and see if there's a way they can do it without getting caught.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the blockchain can help. Who knows? Yeah, right. See? You
are a thought leader, my friend.
See? There we go.
We should offer our consulting services to criminals. That's what I think.
That seems like a bad idea. Anyway.
Not the first one I've had today.
I understand. All right. Well, that is the show and the stories for today. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks to our Patreon donors. Sorry for the prolonged delay, but hopefully we'll be back on a more regular schedule now that I'm back home and through some personal commitments. So, thank you very much, and
thank you, gentlemen and ladies, and all our fine donors. You guys are awesome.
And just a reminder that you can find links to all the stories we talk about on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org, and you can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callan on Twitter at Lerg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLincoln. With that, we will talk again soon. Take care.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.